Welcome, dear listeners, to another shadowed corner of Throne of Nightmares, where the veils between the living and the damned grow thin, and the echoes of forgotten atrocities rise like mist from forgotten graves. I am your guide through these forsaken realms, the one who whispers the tales that history dares not record in full, lest the ink itself bleed with horror. Tonight, we delve into a story steeped in the humid darkness of the antebellum South, a time when the grandeur of white, columned mansions hid chambers of unspeakable cruelty. Our episode uncovers the chilling saga of the Plantation Mistress who forced slaves into her private rituals, 1839, a tale of power twisted into madness, where the chains of slavery bound not just bodies, but souls in profane ceremonies that defy the light of day. Imagine, if you will, the year 1839. The Louisiana bayous are alive with the croak of frogs and the buzz of insects, a symphony of nature that masks the human suffering woven into the very soil. Cotton fields stretch like white shrouds under the merciless sun, worked by hands calloused and broken, owned by souls deemed less than human. In this era, plantations are kingdoms unto themselves, ruled by masters and mistresses whose whims are law and whose secrets fester like open wounds in the night. It is here, amid the opulent decay of Beaumont Plantation, a sprawling estate on the fringes of New Orleans, where Spanish moss hangs like spectral veils from ancient oaks, that our nightmare unfolds. During the antebellum period, Louisiana's plantations relied heavily on the forced labor of enslaved people, with over 200,000 slaves in the state by the 1830s, toiling on sugar and cotton estates that formed the backbone of the Southern economy. These plantations were not mere farms but self-contained worlds of exploitation, where the cruelty was as systemic as the harvest cycles. Picture the mistress herself, Evangeline Beaumont, a woman of porcelain skin and raven hair, her eyes like polished obsidian, reflecting nothing but her own insatiable hunger. Born into Creole aristocracy, she arrived at Beaumont in 1835, widowed young and inheriting the vast lands from a husband whose death whispered of poison and shadows. To the outside world, she was the epitome of Southern grace, hosting lavish balls where crystal chandeliers glittered like stars, and guests sipped mint juleps while ignoring the distant cries from the slave quarters. But beneath that facade lurked a darkness, a void that no wealth could fill. Whispers among the enslaved spoke of her nocturnal wanderings, of candles flickering in forbidden rooms long after midnight, and of rituals that blended the occult whispers of Europe with the stolen spirits of Africa. Her character draws eerie parallels to real figures like Madame Delphine Lalaurie, a New Orleans socialite infamous for her cruel treatment of slaves in the 1830s, whose mansion hid atrocities that shocked even the hardened society of the time. What drove Evangeline to such depths? Was it the isolation of her widowhood, the weight of a bloodline cursed by generations of exploitation? Or something more primordial, a thirst for immortality that led her to desecrate the sacred practices of those she enslaved? As we peel back the layers of this tale, you'll feel the chill of the bayou wind on your skin, hear the rustle of chains in the dark, and sense the eyes of the unseen watching from the shadows. This is no mere ghost story, it's a descent into the heart of human depravity, where the line between master and monster blurs into oblivion. The psychological toll of slavery on owners like Evangeline often manifested in sadistic behaviors, as the institution fostered a sense of unchecked power that corrupted the soul, leading to acts of brutality that went beyond economic necessity. Let me set the scene more vividly, drawing you into the world of Beaumont Plantation. The main house rises like a pale sentinel, its verandas wrapped in wrought iron lace that twists like serpents in the moonlight. Inside, rooms are adorned with imported silks and silver, but the air carries a metallic tang, as if blood has seeped into the walls. The slave cabins huddle at the edge of the fields, crude wooden structures where families clung to fragments of dignity amid the horror. By day, the overseer's whip cracked like thunder, driving the enslaved to harvest the cotton that fueled an empire built on suffering. But it was at night that the true terror began, when Evangeline's carriage would glide silently through the darkness, selecting participants for her private gatherings. Life on these plantations was grueling. Enslaved people faced constant threats of whipping, sexual abuse, and family separation, with mistresses often as cruel as masters, inflicting punishments to maintain their privileged status. These were not the genteel soirees of high society. No, these were ceremonies born of forbidden knowledge, gleaned from dusty tombs smuggled from Paris, and twisted with the hoodoo traditions forcibly extracted from her captives. Hoodoo, that resilient spirituality born from African roots and forged in the fires of slavery, was meant for protection, healing, and resistance. It incorporated elements like conjure bags, root work, and spiritual baths, drawn from West African traditions blended with Christianity. But in Evangeline's hands, it became a tool of torment, a perversion where slaves were compelled to invoke spirits not for their own salvation, but for her eternal youth and power. Imagine the dread as a young mother, her child clutched close, is dragged into the dimly lit attic, forced to chant incantations in languages mangled by fear, while Evangeline's knife gleams in the candlelight. Such forced participation echoed the real desecration of African spiritual practices under slavery, where enslaved people secretly practiced hoodoo in hush harbors to resist their oppressors. The hook that draws us deeper. What if these rituals were not mere madness, but a gateway to something real? Survivors' tales, passed down in hushed tones through generations, speak of shadows that moved of their own accord, of voices from the grave answering her calls, and of bodies that refused to die even as they were broken. One such account, from a runaway slave who escaped in 1840, described a night when the moon turned blood red and the plantation seemed to pulse with an unholy life. "She made us dance the ring shout," he whispered to abolitionists, "but not for our ancestors, for hers, the devils in white lace." This ring shout, a traditional African-derived dance involving counterclockwise circling to invoke spirits, was often perverted by owners who feared or envied its power. As we embark on this journey, feel the weight of history pressing down, the collective agony of millions whose stories were silenced. Yet tonight, we give them voice, unearthing the nightmare that Evangeline Beaumont wrought. Stay with me, listeners, as the shadows lengthen and the truth emerges from the fog, for in the throne of nightmares, knowledge is both curse and key, and once you hear this tale, it may never leave you. To truly immerse you, let's linger on the atmosphere of 1839 Louisiana. The air is thick with the scent of magnolias and decay. The Mississippi River, a sluggish serpent winding through the land, carrying secrets to the sea. Society is a fragile veneer balls and banquets where ladies in hoop skirts fan themselves against the heat, while beneath it all simmers the brutality of the peculiar institution. Slavery is not just economic, it's a spiritual blight, twisting souls into knots of hatred and despair. Evangeline, with her French heritage and occult leanings, embodies this duality, elegant by day, eldritch by night. The Creole society of New Orleans was a melting pot where European occultism mingled with African spiritualism, leading to syncretic practices like those in voodoo ceremonies held in Congo Square during the 1830s. Her library, hidden behind locked doors, held volumes on alchemy and sorcery, pages yellowed with age, inscribed with diagrams of circles and sigils. She had traveled to Haiti in her youth, witnessing the voodoo ceremonies that fueled the revolution and brought back not liberation, but inspiration for domination. Voodoo in New Orleans during the 1830s involved rituals honoring lower spirits, with elements like drumming, dancing, and possession, often led by figures like Marie Laveau. Forcing slaves, many of whom carried their own African spiritual legacies, to participate was the ultimate violation, a rape of the soul that left scars deeper than any lash. The enslaved often used hoodoo for psychological resistance, crafting mojos or using roots to protect against cruelty, but owners like Evangeline appropriated these for control. The Creole aristocracy of New Orleans was rife with such hidden practices, where Catholicism mingled with African spiritualism in secret societies. Evangeline's rituals drew from this syncretic brew, perverting gris charms meant for healing into tools of control. The enslaved, drawing from Congo and Yoruba traditions, resisted with their own conjure, but the power imbalance was vast. As the sun set over the Bayous, the plantation became a stage for these clashes, where the natural world gators lurking in the swamps, owls hooting omens, seemed complicit in the horror. Expand on the sensory immersion. The smell of boiling cane sugar from the mills, sweet yet acrid, mixing with the sweat of labor. The sound of field songs, coded messages of resistance floating on the evening breeze. The taste of fear bitter on the tongue as night fell and the mistress's bell rang. Touch the rough bark of the oaks. Feel the damp earth underfoot and know that beneath it lie the bones of the forgotten. Plantations like Beaumont were sites of immense cruelty, with documented cases of slaves being chained, mutilated, or worked to death, mirroring the horrors uncovered in Lalauries mansion in 1834. This introduction is but the threshold. As we cross into the main narrative, prepare for the descent. The fog thickens, the whispers grow louder, and the throne awaits. Let the expanded details draw you deeper into the abyss, where every shadow hides a secret, and every cry echoes eternity. And now, we step into the story proper, where the threads of fate weave a tapestry of terror. Let us begin with the arrival of Evangeline Beaumont at the plantation that would become her domain of darkness. It was a sweltering summer day in 1835 when the carriage bearing Evangeline rolled through the wrought iron gates of Beaumont Plantation. The dust from the road clung to the wheels like reluctant spirits, and the enslaved workers paused in their labors, their eyes averted but senses alert to the change in the air. The previous master, her husband Henry, had died suddenly, a fever, the doctors said, but rumors spoke of a vial of arsenic hidden in her jewelry box. Evangeline, at 32, was a vision of mourning elegance, her black gown flowing like ink, her veil concealing a face that could charm or chill with a glance. In antebellum Louisiana, widows like her often inherited vast estates, wielding power in a society where women could own property, but were expected to maintain the brutal order of slavery. The plantation spanned thousands of acres, a kingdom of cotton and cane, where over 200 slaves toiled under the watchful eye of overseer Silas Crow, a man whose whip was an extension of his arm. Daily life was a cycle of backbreaking work from dawn to dusk. Enslaved men, women, and children picked cotton or cut cane, facing punishments for any perceived slowness. Evangeline wasted no time asserting her authority. On her first evening, she gathered the household staff in the grand parlor, the room lit by flickering candles that cast long shadows on the wallpaper, adorned with scenes of idyllic French countryside, a mocking contrast to the reality outside. "My dears," she purred, her voice a silken thread laced with steel, "this home is now mine, and you shall serve it as you serve me. Loyalty will be rewarded, betrayal punished beyond imagining." Her eyes scanned the line of enslaved men and women, cooks, maids, field hands selected for their strength or beauty. Among them was Amandine, a young woman of 20, born on the plantation, her skin the color of polished mahogany, her spirit unbroken despite years of hardship. Amandine would become central to the unfolding nightmare, her knowledge of hoodoo passed down from her grandmother, who remembered the shores of Africa, both a blessing and a curse. Hoodoo practices among slaves included using roots like High John the Conqueror for strength and protection, often hidden from owners who viewed them as threats. In those early days, Evangeline's peculiarities were subtle. She would wander the fields at dusk, her white dress glowing like a ghost, observing the workers with an intensity that made skin crawl. Whispers spread. She collected locks of hair from the children, nails from the men, and blood from the women during their monthly cycles. For remedies, she claimed, but the enslaved knew better. In their cabins they spoke in coded language, drawing protective circles in the dirt with chicken feet and herbs to ward off her gaze. These protective rituals were common, as slaves used conjure to shield themselves from overseers' cruelty or to curse their oppressors subtly. One night, as the moon hung low and full, Evangeline summoned her first participant. It was Jonas, a strong field hand known for his storytelling. Tales of Anansi the spider and spirits that danced in the fire. He was dragged to the attic by Crow, the space a labyrinth of beams and dust, lit by a single lantern. Evangeline waited there, surrounded by candles arranged in a pentagram. A book open on her lap, the Grimoire of Eternal Youth, smuggled from a Parisian occultist. "Join me, Jonas," she whispered, her fingers tracing symbols in the air. "Your people know the old ways. Teach me, and you shall be free." But it was a lie. Forcing him to kneel, she made him recite incantations in Yoruba, words he half remembered from childhood stories. As he spoke, she cut a shallow line across his palm. Mixing his blood with hers in a silver bowl, the air grew thick, heavy with the scent of incense and fear. Jonas felt a presence, something cold and hungry, brushing against his soul. When it was over, he was returned to his cabin, shaking, with a mark on his skin that never healed. This blood ritual echoed Vodou practices where offerings were made to Lo, but perverted here for personal gain. This was but the beginning. Evangeline's rituals escalated, blending European alchemy with forced hoodoo elements. She learned from Amandine, under threat of selling her family, how to use High John the Conqueror root for power, but twisted it to bind spirits to her will. Nights became a lottery of terror. Who would be chosen for the attic? The enslaved began to resist in small ways, hiding charms under their pillows, spitting on her shadow, but Evangeline's hold tightened. Resistance often took the form of secret gatherings where slaves performed ecstatic dances and prayers, processing the trauma of bondage. By 1837, the plantation buzzed with unease. Crops withered inexplicably, animals died with twisted limbs, and shadows seemed to linger longer in the corners. Evangeline's beauty remained unchanging, her skin smooth as if time dared not touch her. But the cost was paid in human suffering. One slave, old Mama Zora, refused to participate, spitting in the mistress's face. Her punishment was public, chained in the yard, forced to watch as her grandchildren were whipped. That night, Zora vanished, her cabin empty save for a circle of salt and a feather from a crow, signs of a curse returned. Such disappearances were not uncommon. Slaves sometimes escaped or were sold, but folklore attributed them to spiritual interventions. As tensions built, Amandine emerged as a reluctant leader. In secret meetings in the woods, under the cover of hush harbors, she taught the others protective rituals, bottle trees to trap evil spirits, mojo bags with graveyard dirt to confuse pursuers. "She steals our magic," Amandine whispered, "but we can turn it back." They performed ring shouts, circling counterclockwise to invoke ancestors, their feet stomping a rhythm that echoed like heartbeats from across the ocean. These hush harbors were vital for spiritual and emotional survival, allowing slaves to maintain cultural ties amid oppression. Evangeline sensed the resistance. In 1838, she orchestrated her most ambitious ritual yet, a midnight ceremony in the old barn, where 10 slaves were bound in a circle. Forced to chant while she danced in the center, her body painted with symbols in blood. The air crackled with energy, winds howling despite the still night. One participant, a boy named Ely, collapsed, his eyes rolling back as if possessed. The lower come. He murmured, but not for her, for vengeance. The barn's wooden walls creaked under the strain of the unnatural forces, and the scent of sulfur mingled with the earthy smell of hay. Evangeline's chants grew louder, her voice rising to a fever pitch, demanding the spirits grant her eternal life. The enslaved, their voices hoarse from forced recitation, felt the ground tremble beneath them. Eli's body convulsed, and from his mouth came words in a tongue none recognized, a warning, perhaps from the ancestors. As the ritual peaked, a sudden gust extinguished the candles, plunging the space into darkness. Screams echoed, and when light was restored, one slave lay dead, his body contorted in agony, as if his very bones had rebelled. This scene mirrors accounts of possession in Vodou rituals, where Lo could enter participants, but here it's twisted into horror. This event marked a turning point. The enslaved whispered of signs, owls nesting in the big house, snakes in the mistress's bed. Amandine, gathering roots by moonlight, found a doll fashioned in Evangeline's likeness, pierced with thorns, a hoodoo curse planted by unknown hands. The mistress, undeterred, delved deeper into her grimoires, experimenting with potions that promised dominion over the soul. She forced slaves to ingest mixtures of herbs and blood. Watching as they hallucinated visions she interpreted as prophecies. Such potions drew from rootwork traditions where herbs were used for healing or hexing. Jonas, scarred but resilient, became a bridge between the field hands and house slaves, smuggling messages and charms. "We must strike back," he urged in the dead of night, his voice low amid the chirp of crickets. But fear held many in check. Crow's patrols were relentless, his dogs trained to sniff out gatherings. One attempted escape ended in tragedy. A family of 5, guided by Amandine's directions to the underground railroad, was caught at the bayou's edge. Evangeline's punishment was ritualistic, forcing them to participate in a mock ceremony where they confessed their sins before the whip fell. Escapes were rare and dangerous, often aided by hoodoo charms for safe passage. As 1839 approached, the plantation's atmosphere thickened like storm clouds. Evangeline's rituals became more frequent, her demands more invasive. She began incorporating elements from Creole spiritualism, blending Catholic saints with African Loa in blasphemous fusions. Slaves were made to wear amulets inscribed with sigils, their bodies marked with ash from sacred fires. The psychological toll was immense. Insomnia plagued the cabins. Children woke screaming from nightmares of the mistress's face looming in the dark. The trauma of slavery led to dissociation and despair among the enslaved, while owners like Evangeline exhibited narcissistic delusions. Amandine's resolve hardened. Drawing from her grandmother's teachings, she crafted a plan, a counter-ritual to bind Evangeline's power. Gathering allies under the full moon, they buried effigies at crossroads, invoking protection from Papa Legba, the gatekeeper spirit. The air hummed with their chants, a subtle rebellion that Evangeline felt but could not pinpoint. Her paranoia grew. She accused innocents, leading to more whippings and isolations. Crossroads was sacred in hoodoo, sites for offerings to spirits like Legba. The narrative pauses here, the tension coiling like a spring. The stage is set for escalation, where conflicts ignite and the supernatural bleeds into reality. In Part 2, we plunge into the heart of the storm, with even more layers of dread unveiled. Picking up the thread from where we left off, the year 1839 dawned on Beaumont Plantation like a shroud, the air pregnant with impending doom. Evangeline's rituals had evolved from solitary experiments to elaborate spectacles of domination, each one more depraved than the last. The enslaved, led by Amandine, plotted in whispers, their hoodoo practices now a weapon of subtle rebellion. But the mistress's madness knew no bounds, and the conflicts that ensued would etch eternal scars into the soul of the land. It began with the blood moon gathering, as Evangeline called it. On a night when the moon hung crimson in the sky at an omen, the slaves said, of spilled blood, she commanded 20 of her chosen to assemble in the attic. The space had been transformed, walls draped in black cloth, altars adorned with skulls of animals and stolen relics from African villages, candles flickering in patterns that mimicked the Congo cosmogram, a symbol representing the cycle of life and death in African spirituality. Amandine was among them, her heart pounding as she clutched a hidden mojo bag filled with protective roots. Evangeline, clad in a robe of scarlet silk, her hair loose like a witch's mane, intoned words from her grimoire. "Tonight, we bind the spirits to my will," she declared, her voice echoing with unnatural resonance. She forced the group to form a ring shout, but perverted clockwise instead of counter, to summon not ancestors, but demons of her imagining. As they moved, she slashed shallow cuts on their arms, collecting blood in a chalice mixed with herbs, mandrake from Europe, high john from the south. One by one, they fell into trances, visions assaulting their minds, glimpses of chains breaking, but twisted into eternal bondage. This perversion of the ring shout, traditionally a means of spiritual ecstasy and resistance, highlighted the cultural theft inherent in slavery. Jonas, scarred from the first ritual, resisted. "This ain't your magic," he growled, breaking the circle. Evangeline's rage was swift. With Crow's help, he was bound to a post, forced to watch as others suffered. She made a mundane leader chant. Words of invocation turned to curses, and as the energy built, something answered. The room grew cold, shadows lengthening into forms with glowing eyes. A slave woman screamed as invisible hands clawed her skin, leaving marks that wept blood. Such phenomena echoed ghost stories from slave narratives, where spirits were believed to haunt the living due to unresolved traumas. The aftermath was chaos. 3 participants died that night, officially of fever. But their bodies bore unnatural wounds, limbs contorted as if reset by cruel hands. The plantation whispered of Lo, the spirits of voodoo enraged by the perversion. Amandine, surviving, vowed revenge. In the hush harbors, she rallied the others. "We use our true power. Bottle the evil, root the curse back to her." Bottle trees, a hoodoo practice involving hanging colored bottles to trap malevolent spirits, were erected secretly around the cabins. Evangeline, sensing the shift, intensified her cruelties. She installed iron collars on dissenters, forcing them into daily devotions, where they kneeled before her portrait, reciting oaths of servitude blended with occult phrases. One particularly haunting event was the Feast of Shadows. In the dining hall, under chandeliers that swayed without wind, she hosted a mock banquet. Slaves served as guests, bound to chairs, forced to eat foods laced with hallucinogens, mushrooms, and roots that induced visions of hell. Evangeline presided, her laughter ringing as they writhed, describing apparitions of their deceased loved ones, condemning them. Hallucinogens in hoodoo were used for divination, but here they served to break the spirit. Amid this, romantic entanglements added layers of torment. Evangeline took lovers from among the enslaved men, forcing them into rituals that blended lust with sorcery. One, a handsome carpenter named Lucius, became her obsession. In private chambers, she made him perform acts while chanting spells for fertility, not for children, but for eternal life essence. When he rebelled, she had him flayed in the attic, his screams muffled by rags, his skin used in grim talismans. Sexual exploitation was rampant on plantations, with mistresses often abusing enslaved men, leading to deep psychological scars. The turning point came in midsummer 1839. A fire broke out in the kitchen set by a cook, inspired by tales of resistance like the 1811 slave revolt in Louisiana, where hundreds rose against their owners. As flames licked the walls, rescuers burst into the attic, finding slaves mutilated, limbs stretched on racks, eyes gouged, bodies emaciated from starvation experiments. These horrors mirrored the discoveries in Lalaury's mansion, where slaves were found chained with iron collars, their bodies twisted in agony. Evangeline fled in the confusion, her carriage vanishing into the Bayou night, but not before cursing the land. "The spirits I bound will haunt you all." In the days that followed, the plantation descended into anarchy. Slaves rose up, burning fields, their hoodoo rituals now free ring shouts that called for justice. Amandine led a group to the mistress's library, destroying the grimoire, but not before a final vision. Evangeline's form, spectral and laughing, promising return. The uprising spread like wildfire through the Bayous, whispers reaching other plantations. Crow was overpowered, his body left at a crossroads as a warning. Amandine, now a symbol of resistance, guided many to freedom using hoodoo maps drawn in invisible ink. But the cost was high. Pursuers from New Orleans arrived, quelling the revolt with guns and dogs. Survivors scattered, carrying tales that would fuel abolitionist fires. Rebellions like this were fueled by spiritual beliefs, providing hope amid despair. Evangeline's fate remained a mystery. Some said she drowned in the swamp, her body claimed by gators. Others claimed sightings in Paris, her beauty undimmed, practicing darker arts. The plantation fell to ruin, overgrown with vines, but nights brought eerie lights and cries, as if the rituals lingered. Ghostly apparitions were common in plantation folklore, representing the unrest of enslaved souls. The story ends not with resolution but echoing dread. The enslaved spirits, unbound, watch over the land, a testament to resilience amid horror. With these added layers, the narrative reveals the profound interplay of power, spirituality, and human endurance. To fully grasp the nightmare of Evangeline Beaumont, we must delve into the real history that birthed such horrors, the antebellum South, where slavery's brutality intertwined with spiritual traditions like hoodoo, creating a cauldron of eerie authenticity. While our tale is woven from threads of folklore, it draws from documented atrocities, blending fact with the unsettling whispers of legend. The year 1839 sits squarely in the antebellum era 1815-1861, a time of economic boom for the South, fueled by cotton plantations in states like Louisiana. These estates were microcosms of power, where white owners wielded absolute control over enslaved Africans imported en masse during the transatlantic slave trade. By 1839, Louisiana alone had over 200,000 slaves, many on plantations like our fictional Beaumont, where sugar and cotton production demanded relentless labor. Mistresses played key roles, often as cruel as their husbands. Historical accounts reveal women like those in South Carolina who inflicted violence to maintain privilege, distinguishing between their slaves and others. Cruelty was commonplace. Whippings, sexual abuse, and psychological torment were tools to enforce submission. A real-life parallel is Madame Delphine LaLaurie, a New Orleans socialite whose 1834 mansion fire exposed her tortures. Born in 1787, she married 3 times, owning a royal street home where she abused slaves. The fire, set by a chained cook, revealed attic horrors: slaves mutilated, chained, emaciated, with reports of mouths sewn shut, limbs reset in crab-like positions, and skin peeled to resemble caterpillars. Bodies were found buried on grounds, and LaLaurie fled to France. Legends embellish with ritualistic elements: eyes gouged, limbs reset, though historical facts focus on sadism. Similar cases abound. Appeals to Louisiana's Supreme Court document excessive cruelty, like slaves beaten to death or worked until collapse. Cultural context includes hoodoo, a spirituality developed by enslaved Africans, blending Bakongo, Yoruba, and other traditions with Christianity and Native American elements. On plantations, it was resistance: mojo bags for protection, roots to avoid whippings, ring shouts for ancestral communion. Slaves used it secretly in hush harbors, turning oppression into empowerment. Voodoo in New Orleans, influenced by Haitian immigrants after the 1791 revolution, added layers, with figures like Marie Laveau practicing openly in the 1830s, leading ceremonies on Bayou Sate, John that included head washing rituals and public parties. White owners sometimes appropriated these practices, fearing or envying their power, leading to perversions like in our story. Folklore speaks of conjure on plantations, where slaves cursed overseers or escaped using magic, such as tossing coffee grounds for fortune, telling or tying up little bags of roots. This blend of fact and legend creates an eerie authenticity, where rituals feel plausible amid the trauma. Expanding on slavery's horrors, women slaves faced double jeopardy: labor and sexual exploitation. Mistresses, jealous of affairs, abused them viciously, sometimes selling children born of such unions. Cultural trauma lingers in ghost stories, like haunted plantations where spirits seek justice, reflecting the unrest of unresolved atrocities. In our narrative, Evangeline's rituals echo these dynamics, twisting hoodoo into torment, reflecting how slavery desecrated African spirituality. The Creole aristocracy dabbled in occultism, with spiritualism circles in New Orleans blending Catholicism and African elements. Groups like the Cercle Harmonique held seances for social equality, but for elites like LaLaurie, it may have fueled darker pursuits. Atrocities in 1839 included the Amistad Revolt, where enslaved Africans rebelled on a ship, highlighting resistance. In Louisiana, the 1811 revolt saw hundreds rise, inspiring fear among owners and leading to harsher controls. Images like Whip Peter show physical scars, but spiritual wounds ran deeper, with slaves turning to hoodoo for healing. This context grounds our tale in unsettling reality, where folklore amplifies the horror of history. Plantations today, like Whitney Plantation, focus on the slave experience, contrasting with sites that romanticize the antebellum era. The legacy includes modern tourism debates, where some celebrate the burning of structures like Nottoway as symbolic justice. Beyond the surface chills, this tale probes deeper into symbolic and psychological realms, connecting to universal fears, cultural trauma, and the shadows of human nature. With an ominous lens, we dissect how Evangeline's story mirrors broader horrors. Symbolically, the rituals represent power's corruption. Slavery was a ritual of domination, chains symbolizing soul binding. Evangeline's perversion of hoodoo, a tool of resistance, symbolizes colonialism's theft of culture, turning empowerment into subjugation. The attic, a hidden space, evokes the subconscious, where repressed guilt festers into madness. Blood rituals signify the extraction of life force, paralleling how slavery drained the enslaved for economic gain. Psychologically, Evangeline embodies narcissism and sadism, her quest for immortality a fear of death amplified by privilege. Forcing participation gaslights victims, blurring reality and nightmare, akin to trauma's dissociation. For slaves, the effects included shame, low self-esteem, and intergenerational trauma, persisting in modern African-American mental health issues. Owners suffered too. The psychology of slavery fostered delusions of superiority, leading to moral decay and fear of revolt. Thematically, it ties to cultural trauma. Slavery's legacy haunts America, like ghosts in folklore. Universal fears, loss of autonomy, the unknown are amplified. Rituals invoke dread of the supernatural invading the mundane. The story warns of unchecked authority, echoing existential horrors where the oppressor becomes the haunted. Human nature's darkness. Power reveals monsters, as in Lalaurie's case. The psychological legacy includes white descendants' guilt and denial, while black descendants grapple with resilience amid ongoing racism. Connections to modern issues echoes in systemic racism. Where spiritual appropriation persists, the enslaved's resistance highlights resilience, a theme in black spiritual traditions. In an ominous tone, this tale lingers as a cautionary echo, questioning our own shadows and the rituals we enact in daily life. The enduring impact underscores how slavery's psychology shapes society, from economic disparities to mental health crises. As our journey through the nightmare of Beaumont Plantation draws to a close, the shadows we've unearthed refuse to fade. Evangeline Beaumont, that spectral mistress, vanishes into legend, but her curse endures, a chilling reminder that some evils transcend time. In the years after 1839, the plantation crumbled, fields overgrown, the house a ruin haunted by whispers. Survivors like Amandine carried the story north, seeding abolitionist fires. Yet questions linger. Did the rituals grant her immortality? Sightings persist, a woman in white, wandering Bayus, calling names in the night. The psychological scars of such events echo in slave narratives, where trauma manifested as visions and hauntings. Listeners, let this tale haunt you in the throne of nightmares. We confront the past's ghosts, lest they claim the future. Sleep uneasily, for the rituals may yet call your name.